Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here again, ready to take some really dense, cutting-edge research in cybersecurity.
Yeah, the kind of stuff that can be tough to wade through.
Exactly. And our job is to distill it, break it down into the actionable insights you really need to know.
And today, we're kicking out something pretty significant.
We are. We're embarking on a critical mission, a deep dive into the core motivation, the why, behind integrating reinforcement learning, or RL, into cyber operations. Specifically, the automated side of things.
Right. In this deep dive, it really starts from acknowledging that the ground rules in cybersecurity, they fundamentally shifted.
Things are moving faster.
Much faster. We have to address this accelerating threat landscape. I mean, the sources we're looking at, they paint a pretty stark picture.
It's not just random hackers anymore, is it?
No, not at all. We're dealing with sophisticated, well-funded nation-state actors. And at the same time, the attack surface, the area we need to defend, it's just ballooning. Think cloud migration, IoT devices everywhere, remote work.
It's huge. And the really scary part, I think, is how computation comes into play. Machine learning, AI, these aren't future concepts.
Oh no, they're here now. The sources call them a force multiplier for adversaries, and they're using it actively.
How so? Like automating attacks.
Yeah, automating reconnaissance, for one, generating malware variants on the fly, polymorphic stuff that basic signature detection just misses.
And testing thousands of ways in simultaneously.
Exactly. Testing exploitation chains at speeds humans just can't comprehend, let alone match.
So if the attackers are using algorithms to boost their volume, their speed, their stealth,
Then defenders, well, they don't really have a choice, do they? They have to respond with similar capabilities.
it becomes an arms race, essentially.
It absolutely does, and that's the core argument driving this research, The norm is very quickly becoming AI to combat AI,
Using our own advanced methods.
to provide detection capabilities outside the ability of existing rules-based technologies and humans to detect. That's the quote from the source. The human element, frankly, is becoming too slow. It can't fight automation at this scale.
Okay, so our mission today is really foundational. We're tackling the why. Chapter 1 of this research, the motivation. Why do organizations need to adopt RL for things like penetration testing or pen testing?
We need to get those fundamental concepts down first, yeah. What's driving this whole approach?
And it's important for you, listening, to understand how RL fits in. For blue teams, the defenders, what does it offer?
Well, for them, it's about optimizing workflows, getting better visibility into their own networks, and crucially, creating new ways to detect threats, smarter detection.
But then there's the other side, which is maybe even more intriguing or maybe unsettling, cyber resilience planning.
Yes. Red teams and purple teams.
Yeah.
The attackers and the ones coordinating offense and defense.
For them, RL is about modeling adversaries that are hyper-efficient, right? Building a digital opponent that doesn't get tired, doesn't miss things.
Exactly. It's like the ultimate stress test. You use the AI to simulate the most relentless, optimized attacker possible.
And force the system to reveal its absolute weakest points under that kind of algorithmic pressure.
Find the cracks you'd otherwise miss.
Okay, so let's get into the core case. Why RL specifically for pen testing? Why has this moved from, say, a cool research idea to something actually feasible? What changed?
Well, the feasibility really comes down to how RL handles complexity, especially the kind of complexity that older algorithms, even some simpler machine learning models, just choke on.
What kind of complexity are we talking about?
We're talking about managing the constraints on the representation of attack graphs, things like scale and observability. Think about a big corporate network.
Huge. Global, maybe?
Yeah, millions of potential attack paths, maybe more. Trying to model that with traditional methods, it just falls apart. The scale is too big.
I can picture that, trying to map out every possible vulnerability chain manually across, like, a global banks network. Forget it. It's constantly changing, too.
Exactly. It's a massive dynamic graph. And the reason this is so urgent now is because of how attackers operate. The source calls it adversarial pathfinding.
Meaning they're not just randomly poking around.
No way. Attackers today, especially the sophisticated ones, they invest heavily in reconnaissance. They're building what the sources call high-fidelity maps of the target network.
Like drawing a blueprint before they break in?
Pretty much. They're treating the network less like a target-rich environment and more like a maze. They have a goal, and they're finding the best way to get there.
So they're like military strategists in cyberspace. They're figuring out the optimal paths for the whole operation.
Optimal paths, exactly. How to get in, how to move laterally without setting off alarms, how to get higher privileges, and then crucially, how to get the data out. all while minimizing their footprint, their time on target.
Okay, that makes sense. And this leads us to, well, a core conflict that RL helps us understand better.
Right? The visibility trade-off. This is central. The goals of the red team, the attacker, and the blue team, the defender, are constantly pulling in opposite directions, and it all revolves around network visibility.
Okay, let's break that down. Let's take the red team view first. What are they trying to optimize? How does that shape their pathfinding?
The red team's goal, according to the research, is using visibility optimization principles to actively reduce the effectiveness of detection.
So not just finding a path, but finding a quiet path.
Precisely. They aren't just looking for the technically shortest route. They want the shortest, quietest path. The sources say they're keenly traversing paths by reducing visibility.
What does that mean in practice? Avoiding certain sensors?
Yeah, favoring paths that use maybe common, benign-looking protocols, bypassing sensors that aren't very sensitive, or maybe using parts of the network that aren't heavily logged or monitored. It's all about maximizing their reward, which is access.
While minimizing the cost, which is the chance of getting caught.
Exactly. That calculation is key.
That's a really important distinction. It shifts how you think about pen testing, doesn't it? A human tester might just go for the biggest technical vulnerability, the highest CVSS score.
Right, path of least technical resistance. But an RL agent, modeling a smart adversary, it focuses on the path of least detection. That's a different calculation.
Okay, so that's the red team goal. How does that then help the blue team if RL models this stealthy attacker?
Well, that's the payoff for the defenders. By running these RL simulations, based on how a sophisticated attacker thinks about visibility.
The blue team learns where those optimized stealthy paths actually are.
Exactly. And that's how they identify the really crucial blind spots and network weaknesses. Not just the obvious technical vulnerabilities, but the operational weaknesses in their monitoring and defenses.
So you move from just patching known bugs to actually blocking the attack chains the adversary is likely to use.
Right. You're shoring up defenses where the sophisticated attacker is most likely to tread quietly.
This feels like a pretty fundamental critique of, well, traditional methods. Why have human-driven pen tests become not enough?
Yeah, the sources are pretty clear on this. The main problem is scale and just cognitive overload. Traditional pen tests, they're described as getting results through manual and tedious means.
I can imagine. What does an analyst actually do?
Think about it. They get some initial vulnerability scan results.
Mm-hmm.
Then they have to manually try and connect those dots across maybe thousands, tens of thousands of machines.
While correlating that with network traffic logs.
User behavior logs, endpoint security alerts.
Yeah.
It's just a flood.
The sheer volume of data must be crushing. Even for a medium-sized company, you're talking terabytes a day, potentially.
Easily. And that makes the process of actually understanding what it all means to the post-collection intelligence or sense-making a massive bottleneck. The human operator is just drowning in noise.
Looking for that needle in a digital haystack.
A constantly growing haystack, yeah. And it's slow. An automated attacker script might probe thousands of potential routes in an hour. A human team, they might spend days manually exploring just 5 promising leads.
The speed mismatch is huge, existential even.
It really is. Which brings us back to RL. This is where it really shines, as the sources put it, as a data sifter.
Okay, so what allows the RL agent to spot connections a human analyst might miss, even if the human technically has access to all the same data feeds?
The key thing is its ability to automatically plow through mountains of previously ignored data. An RL agent doesn't see log entries or scan results as isolated events. It sees them as features, as nodes and edges in a massive graph representing the network state.
And it learns differently, not just rules-based.
Right. It doesn't rely on someone pre-programming rules like if this, then that. It learns to assign a value, a reward, or a cost to every possible action or state transition within that graph. It learns the context.
And this learning process is what leads to those breakthroughs, those graph-linked data epiphanies the research mentions. Can you give us a more concrete example? What does an epiphany look like here?
Okay, sure. Imagine 3 separate facts, seemingly unrelated, maybe low priority on their rank.
Okay.
Fact 1, there's an internal development server, server A. It's got an old patch missing, but it's a low-severity vulnerability, maybe a CVSS score of 4.0. Nobody really accesses it much.
So low risk gets ignored in the patching cycle, probably.
Fact 2, there's a specific user account. Let's call it user X. This user frequently logs into an internal DNS server that, well, doesn't have great monitoring. A bit of a blind spot.
Okay, maybe sloppy admin behavior, but not critical.
Not on its own, no.
Yeah.
Fact 3, the firewall rule between that DNS server and the dev server, server A, it's way too permissive. Maybe someone set it up temporarily years ago and forgot about it.
Ah, I see where this might be going.
A human analyst, looking through logs for critical alerts, probably ignores server A entirely because of the low CVSS and user X's activity on the DNS server. Just looks like noise, maybe normal admin stuff.
Right. Each piece is minor.
But the RL agent, it doesn't see isolated facts. It sees the entire chain as a potential policy, a path with a calculated value. It learns that the optimal path isn't necessarily hitting the highest CVSS score directly.
It finds the connection.
It finds the connection. It learns the best path might be. Compromise the DNS server using user X's maybe weak credentials or privileges, then use that forgotten, overly permissive firewall rule to hop over to server A.
And then use that low-severity vulnerability, which is now easily accessible, to gain lateral movement or credentials.
Exactly. The real vulnerability wasn't just server A's low CVSS score. It was the chain, the connectivity that linked a weakly monitored user account through a forgotten firewall rule to an accessible, albeit low-severity target. That chain is the epiphany.
That's the pattern, the anomaly, the structural weakness the algorithm finds by looking at the whole graph.
Precisely. The vulnerability is in the context, the connectivity, not just the individual node.
That makes so much sense. And crucially, the sources stress how these models learn. It's not from static data sets, is it?
No, and this is critical. They learn through direct interaction with these attack graphs. And these graphs are constantly enriched with fresh scan data stuff coming from endpoint detection, EP, and network detection, ND systems.
So it's learning from the live or near live state of the network.
Yes, that direct interaction means the agent is always adapting. It's not trained on a snapshot from 6 months ago. A new scan comes in, finds a new host, a new vulnerability, maybe a firewall rule changes, the attack graph gets updated.
And the agent immediately starts recalculating its optimal policy based on that new reality.
That dynamic learning is what lets it accurately model the unpredictable step-by-step nature of a real attack campaign. An attacker adapts, so the defense model has to adapt just as quickly.
It's really the only way to potentially stay ahead, or at least keep pace, with an adversary who might also be using adaptive algorithmic approaches.
Or even just a clever, persistent human attacker.
Okay, so if we're going to talk about these attack paths, these chains of actions, whether they're found by humans or by AI, we need a shared language, right?
Absolutely. You need a common vocabulary. And that brings us squarely to the MIE, ATT, and CK framework. It really serves as the foundational dictionary for talking about adversary behavior in this research.
ATT and CK is everywhere now in cybersecurity, but understanding its origins is important, isn't it? Where did it come from?
It really is key. The framework grew out of research IDRI was doing, starting way back around 2010, called the Fort Meade experiment, or FMX.
And FMX wasn't just theory on paper.
No, it was described as a living lab, a dedicated research environment they built specifically to watch attackers, or rather attack emulators, and systematically categorize their behavior during structured exercises. They needed a consistent way to describe what the attackers were doing step by step.
And they had a specific mindset going in.
Yeah, crucially, FMX operated under an assumed breach philosophy. They figured, look, preventing 100% of initial breaches is probably impossible against sophisticated attackers.
So focus on detecting them after they get in.
Exactly. Expedite detection of these advanced persistent threats, APTs, after they've already got a foothold. So the focus shifted heavily towards telemetry sensing, gathering data from inside the network, and analyzing behaviors, not just signatures at the edge.
Okay, so ATT and CK itself emerges from that, initially focused on Windows.
Right. It started around 2013, documenting the common tactics, techniques, and procedures, the TTPs, that these APTs were using, primarily on Windows Enterprise networks back then.
But it's grown massively since.
Oh, yeah. Now it covers enterprise IT broadly, cloud environments, mobile. It's a huge catalog of known adversary actions.
And its real value, its significance, lies in how it structures this information.
Absolutely. Its utility comes from documenting and providing behavioral observables. It connects the raw data an analyst sees, like a specific command being run or a file being created, to a known technique.
So instead of just seeing, say, a weird PowerShell command,
you can categorize it under the technique, command, and scripting interpreter, PowerShell, which falls under the tactic execution. It gives you context. The whole TTP structure helps analysts understand the intent behind the action, the adversary's likely objective.
And the way it's often visualized, like the figure 1.1 mentioned in the source, It kind of maps onto the cyber kill chain, doesn't it? It highlights different detection strategies.
Yeah, that visual structure is really helpful for defenders. You can see how the bookends of an attack, things like initial access at the start and command and control, C2, later on, often involve tactics you'd primarily detect using network detection, ND traffic crossing the perimeter.
All this stuff in the
The
prayer.
internal tactics like privilege escalation, credential access, lateral movement, those are much more likely to be caught via endpoint detection, EP, because they're happening on the compromised machines themselves.
Okay, so we have this widely adopted, very detailed, visually useful framework. It's like the standard playbook for describing attacks, which begs the question, if ATT and CK is so good, why do we still need these complex RL models we were just talking about?
Oh, yeah. That's where we hit the limitations. And these limitations are, in fact, a primary motivation for using RL. ATT and CK is great, but it has flaws.
Okay, what's the first big one?
The first major flaw is kind of structural. The sources call it missing links. ATT and CK gives you this fantastic, comprehensive list of individual techniques, an encyclopedia of badness. But it doesn't really show you how adversaries combine these techniques. It's like having a list of all the words in a language, but no grammar rules showing how to make sentences.
So it gives you the building blocks, the TTPs.
But not the complex multi-stage chains or sequences that a real thinking adversary actually uses to achieve their objective. It doesn't capture the flow.
Right, a human attacker isn't just picking techniques out of a hat. They're stringing them together logically, step by step, trying to stay hidden.
Exactly. And that's sequencing, finding the optimal sequence of TTPs based on the current network state and the goal. That's precisely what RL is designed to do mathematically. It moves you from just listing techniques to actually modeling the attack campaign.
Okay, so that's missing links. What's the next limitation?
The next one has to do with the data itself, reporting bias. The ATT and CK framework is built by necessity, on publicly available threat intelligence, reports from security vendors, researchers, government disclosures.
What people choose to share, basically.
Right. And that creates a potential blind spot. Imagine a really sophisticated, successful attack, maybe a nation-state operation that achieves its goals and never gets publicly reported.
Its TTPs wouldn't make it into the framework.
Exactly. The techniques used in that successful, undisclosed attack simply won't be represented in ATT and CK. So using ATT and CK alone makes it really hard to know the operational ground truth of what the most advanced adversaries are really doing right now. We end up modeling the attacks we know about, which might not be the most dangerous ones out there.
That's a serious issue. You're potentially always training your defenses based on yesterday's publicly known threats.
You are. And then there's a related third limitation, mapping bias.
Mapping bias. How does that work?
This happens when analysts or automated tools take a raw threat intelligence report and try to map the described activities to specific ATT and CK techniques. Sometimes that mapping can be a bit subjective.
How so?
Well, the way an analyst interprets a sentence or the specific template a vendor uses for their reports might influence which ATT and CK technique gets assigned. It might not perfectly capture the nuance of what the attacker actually did. So the mapping itself can introduce a kind of skew or misrepresentation.
Okay, so if the underlying data for the framework is incomplete because of reporting bias, and the structure itself struggles with sequencing because of missing links, it really strengthens the case for RL, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Because the RL agent, ideally, isn't learning just from public reports. It's learning from the actual state changes it observes in the simulated network environment, the attack graph enriched with live data. It doesn't care if a technique was reported publicly. It cares if using that technique helps it achieve its goal in this specific environment.
Got it. So ATT and CK provides the essential language.
Correct. The sources are clear. Even with these flaws, ATT and CK is still one of the few broadly accepted methodologies for characterizing adversarial workflows. It gives the RL agent its vocabulary, the list of possible verbs or actions the TTPs it can choose from.
But the RL algorithm itself provides the intelligence.
Yes. The RL provides the grammar, the smarts to figure out the optimal, stealthy, complex sequence, the sentence structure, using those TTP words. It overcomes ATT and CK's limitations to model realistic campaigns and discover potentially novel attack paths. It moves from just describing past attacks to actively discovering potential future ones.
All right, let's shift gears slightly. To make these RL simulations realistic, the agent needs a rich environment to operate in. And that brings us to a really important analogy used in the research: cyber terrain.
Yes, this is a direct borrowing from military doctrine. specifically from intelligence preparation of the battlefield, or IPB.
IPB in the physical world, that's about understanding the ground, right?
Exactly. It's fundamental to military planning. Systematically analyzing the environment, the hills, rivers, roads, weather, vegetation, to understand how it affects both your own forces and the enemy's. It lets commanders anticipate enemy moves, find advantageous positions, and plan operations effectively. You have to know the ground.
So the challenge is translating that comprehensive physical understanding to the digital realm. How do the researchers define this cyber terrain?
It's a very broad and deliberate definition. Cyber terrain is defined as the systems, devices, protocols, data, software, processes, cyber personas, and other network entities that comprise, supervise, and control cyberspace.
Wow, okay, so it's not just the servers and routers. It includes software, data flows, procedures, even the users, cyber personas.
Absolutely. That's key. It forces you to think beyond just the hardware or the network topology. It includes the operational policies, the user behaviors, the data sensitivity, the whole context.
And this terrain concept applies at different levels.
Yes, the source emphasizes considering the operational scope. Strategic level terrain could be things like transatlantic fiber optic cables or major cloud infrastructure providers.
Operational level.
Maybe regional data centers, specific virtual private clouds within AWS or Azure, or major internal network segments.
And tactical.
Down to the nitty-gritty. Local area network protocols like ARP or DHCP, specific host configurations, running services, firewall rules between two servers. You need to consider the terrain's impact at all these levels to model a realistic attack.
Okay, that's a comprehensive view. Within this vast definition, where does the RL agent we've been discussing actually operate? What's its focus?
The research specifies that the RL agent primarily engages within the logical plane of this cyber terrain.
The logical plane, meaning not the physical hardware itself.
Generally, yes. It excludes things like, the physical security of the data center, the cooling systems, the power grid reliability. Those are usually outside the scope of a typical penetration testing simulation focused on network exploitation.
So, technically speaking, which network layers are we talking about for this logical plane?
It corresponds pretty directly to layers 2 through 7 of the standard OSI model.
Okay, so that's data link, network, transport, session, presentation, and application layers. Basically everything above the physical wire.
Right. These are the layers where communication rules are defined, where network traffic flows, where services like web servers or databases operate, and where users actually interact with applications and data.
And that's critical because an attacker, or our RL agent simulating one, doesn't necessarily need to physically tamper with hardware. They manipulate the rules and protocols operating at these logical layers.
Precisely. The agent's action space, the set of things it can actually do, like sending a specific packet, trying to exploit against a service, authenticating, is fundamentally defined by the context of those logical layers.
For instance, if access to a web application at layer 7 is blocked by a firewall rule at layer 4.
The agent has to learn that.
Yeah.
It needs to either figure out how to bypass that layer 4 policy or find a completely different path that avoids that bottleneck. The terrain dictates the available moves.
Okay, now let's tie this directly back to the core motivation. Why is incorporating this detailed cyber terrain concept into the simulation so vital for making RL effective and realistic?
It connects straight back to the math underlying the RL agent, the Markov decision process, or MDP. Remember, an MDP models the world in terms of states, actions, and rewards.
Right. The agent is in a certain state, it takes an action, transitions to a new state, and gets some reward or penalty.
Exactly. And the richness and accuracy of the state space in that MDP comes directly from how well we define the cyber terrain.
So a poorly defined terrain means a simplistic state space.
Precisely. If we don't define the terrain properly, the RL agent's view of the world is too simple. It might only see things like basic vulnerability scores, a CVSS score for a host, for example.
And CVSS scores, while useful for prioritizing patches,
Only tell you the potential technical impact of exploiting that one vulnerability in isolation. They don't tell you how hard it is to reach that vulnerable host, or how likely you are to get detected on the way there, or what you can do after exploiting it.
That's the real-world calculation an attacker makes, isn't it? A critical vulnerability, CVSS 9.8, might be tempting.
But if that host is completely isolated on a segmented network, behind multiple firewalls, requires unique credentials only available on a highly monitored admin workstation.
A smart attacker, human or AI, might just ignore it and go for an easier, lower CVSS target that offers a better path forward with less risk.
Exactly. The cyber terrain definition captures that holistic view. It integrates the technical vulnerability data, like CVSS, with all that crucial defensive context, the network segmentation, the monitoring coverage, the user privileges required, the available protocols, the data sensitivity.
And that allows the RL agent to learn much more sophisticated, risk-aware behavior.
Yes, it learns that a high probability of detection often translates to a significant negative reward, potentially outweighing the positive reward of popping a critical box. This pushes the agent towards stealthier, lower visibility paths.
The same kind of risk-averse but effective behavior you see from competent human penetration testers or actual APT groups.
That's the goal. To make the simulation rich enough, the terrain detailed enough, that the AI learns to make the same kind of strategic trade-offs a skilled human attacker would make. It's modeling not just what's possible, but what's probable and prudent given the risks.
So it elevates the simulation from just running an automated vulnerability scan
To creating a detailed emulation of a persistent, intelligent adversary navigating a specific, complex, and realistically defined digital landscape. That's the power of combining RL with a well-defined cyber terrain. #tag conclusion.
Okay, that was a really necessary, detailed look at the fundamental why, the motivation for bringing reinforcement learning into CyberOps. Let's try and synthesize the key takeaways for you, the listener.
Yeah, let's boil it down. First, and maybe foremost, RL is driven by necessity. It's a response to this accelerating threat landscape.
The speed and sophistication of modern attackers.
Right. It's motivated by the need to somehow combat these advanced pathfinding adversaries who are already using AI as a force multiplier to find those optimal, low-visibility attack routes. We need AI to fight AI.
Second takeaway. RL offers a unique advantage over traditional human-driven methods because it acts like a superpowered data sifter.
It analyzes these dynamic, constantly updated attack routes, these enriched maps of the network environment, and it finds critical patterns, connections, pathways.
Those graph-linked data epiphanies.
Exactly. Connections that human teams are often too slow or too overwhelmed by data volume to spot.
Okay, third point. IFRE, ATT, and CK is essential, but it's not enough on its own.
Right. ATT and CK provides the vital common language, the vocabulary of TTPs. But RL is needed to overcome its limitations, the missing links in sequencing, the potential reporting bias.
RL models the complex combination and sequence of those TTPs in a specific context.
Yes, it adds the grammar to ATT and CK's dictionary.
And finally, that concept of cyber terrain.
Crucial. It's the military analogy that grounds the simulation. It defines the digital battlefield, the environment, providing the rich context needed for realistic RL simulation.
Moving way beyond just static vulnerability scores.
To capture the attacker's holistic, risk-aware perspective within that mathematically defined state space of the MDP.
Makes sense. And underpinning all of this is a core belief from the researchers, right? That serious attack campaigns aren't random.
Exactly. They're well-orchestrated plans, calculated sequences of actions. And that's precisely why RL, built on the mathematics of Markov decision processes, is such a good fit. MDPs are designed to find the optimal sequence of decisions in complex environments where there's randomness and uncertainty.
Which perfectly describes cybersecurity. And that leads us, I think, to our final provocative thought for you to chew on.
Yeah, the source material points out that MDPs model this decision-making under uncertainty, influenced by both randomness and the agent's own actions.
Which resonates deeply with the unpredictable nature of penetration testing. It feels right. But the whole challenge is taking that messy, real-world uncertainty
and distilling it down into a neat mathematical formula. States, actions, rewards.
So here's the question it leaves us with. If the goal is to model and ultimately maybe exceed human intelligence and attack planning, how much of a real-world, creative, human-driven cyber operation can we actually capture in that MDP formula?
And where does the AI potentially go beyond? At what point does the RL agent, purely optimizing its reward function based on the defined terrain and PTPs, start finding attack paths that are mathematically optimal but, well, paths a human adversary would simply never have conceived of?
Paths that are maybe too computationally complex for a human brain to map out, too long and convoluted, or just too weird, too counterintuitive based on human experience and biases.
Could the AI, unleashed on this complex terrain model, end up showing us entirely new categories of vulnerabilities, emergent weaknesses arising from the interactions within the system that we literally didn't know were theoretically possible?
Until a machine, optimizing relentlessly, showed us exactly how to exploit them. That's quite a future to contemplate.
A future where the algorithms might reveal the hidden flaws we inadvertently built into the very foundations of our digital world.
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the motivation for reinforcement learning in cybersecurity. We'll be back soon to explore the next chapter.